This idea that Adrian Dunbar talks about, the idea of arts not as a commodity, not as a way of selling soap or on TV or pushing pushing history or developing a way of making science more accessible, not as a thing that does something else, but a thing that is the thing itself, i.e., creativity. That it's a core process, that it is a way of looking at the world, that it's a way of connecting things and people in ways that create a certain degree of aesthetic sense, um, and that can potentially um, begin to make the world better. Not as a, in other words, not as a sugar on a nasty pill, but actually as a way of looking at the world. It's much more creative, open-minded, and capable of delivering um, uh, something that's recognizable and meaningful.
It's art is a way of laying open, right, ways of exploring the paradoxes of the world, right? It's not a linear thing. Although in each fashion of art you get a kind of linearity calling in on it, but when you move from one block of art, as it were, to the next block of art, which says the previous block of art was useless, right? There comes a time when people look back to the block of art that you've rejected and realize that it's got a lot in it, right? That having had time to settle down and to lose all its sort of fluff and bits and pieces around it, actually comes out to be a meaningful statement about the nature of when I grew up, Victorian art was becoming very, very sort of sneered at, right? And I was one of them. You could see all these new ideas coming up. But if you look back at Victorian art now, you've or some you begin to realize it was not so much out of date. It was actually trying to get at the truth of its own generation, and within the art, within the things said, or seen or produced in that time, that there are statements that are part of, as it were, the infinite understanding of what it is to be a human being. And it's not that the idea of the progression from one to another, which leads to the rejection of the one for the other, that fades away. It's not worth bothering about anymore. You can actually treat the piece of art, the art form, right, as a way of actually getting at a truth that came about the nature of humanity, that came out at that time, which also has links to what was before it, right, and has pointers to what was coming. So it's not, and one is no better than the other. I think 20th century art, that, in its way was very exciting. I mean, some of it I look at now and I think, yeah, but it's said its message. It's kind of, it has no more to say. There's more, something else is there now crying out to be said, because the underlying nature of humanity, the underlying development of humanity, and its place in the world, and its attitude to all the other living creatures on the earth, and its attitude to its own planet, that is changing so much that those previous ideas, in a way, seem to have lost a lot of their validity. But there will come a time when not necessarily the art that was appreciated at the time, right, or made the money at the time, but something somewhere hidden within the art will be a truth that is of vital importance to us in the future. as any art that we're creating now. It kind of finds its place in that sort of, in the overall pattern of what the nature of creation
and in this day and age, creation is everywhere. Everywhere we look, we have created goods. In a way, certainly in my grandfather's time, would have been unthinkable. I mean, the Welsh dresser, the plates, the knives, the forks, the bucket for getting the water from the well. These were all very simple artifacts. But everywhere we're looking now, even in the landscape, with big, heavy, earth-moving machinery, our capacity to mold the landscape around us is infinitely larger than it ever was before. And so perhaps there's this business of creativity with greater leisure time, more people feeling a need to kind of to mold the world around their own particular preoccupations. That this business about creativity is a very hard one to sidestep, and yet it is consistently pushed out to the side and not seen as relevant. You know, that you need.
But it's used as a word in advertisements and commercials and things like that, as though it is an important word. It's like those forces sweep up these words and put them back at you, right? Not as fresh inventions of words, but really put them back at you in order to make you think that the commercial behind it, or what is behind the commercial, has a value that it doesn't have, because it links itself with all these all these words that have a certain valuable quality about them. I mean, the arts world, the commercial world is full of creativity. But you have to ask them beyond that, well, what's that creativity for? What is the purpose of that creativity? And so you have to go back.
Is that, do you think, Greg, a function of the marginalization of the arts, a pushing of the arts aside from the central mission of discovering why it is we're here and what it is we're here to do?
It's a failure to understand the simplicity of the art at its core, the sense of its, both, it's all paradoxical, the simplicity of the art, but the depth of the art. It is the history of the spirit, I think. The flesh spirit, the spirit in the flesh. It's that history. It's that telling, what has had to be put up with by simply being a finite living creature, in the sense that we have it. And it's not something that belongs to the professional. It's not something to the person who has been to drama school or art school or anything like that. It's something that should be in the pocket of every human being. And with the drama that I did, for example, I'm beginning to realize that I couldn't get into the professional theatre, except the professional theatre, inverted commas, that I created. But the work that I did with schools, the drama that I did with schools, is the most important place to explore creativity, not in educational terms, not in terms of getting through exams, but simply in relating to the kids and letting them have their ideas about what creatively moves them, right? And that's far more important than taking the best ones and training them and, giving them professional status.
Because at its core, it's about them creatively examining how they respond to the world.
That's right.
I mean, it's interesting that years ago I was in Madrid. I went to there's a room where they've set aside Picasso's Guernica, and it's on a huge wall down one side of the gallery. But as you come in, you go through this. There are lots of little sketches and notebooks and things that Picasso was using for months. And because it's such a well-known, it's a well-known piece of art, you recognize the bits and pieces belong to the big thing itself. And there's a funny sort of way that once you get into the narrative of this, your eye doesn't want to engage with the main thing, because what the exhibition is telling you is this is a man building up his creative juices to do something of a grand statement about the utter destruction of human beings in one short, terrifying episode. And then you get through all of that, and then you're confronted with the scale of the thing, which you're not prepared for. But then you can see where all that energy in building up, he builds up the details in all of the preparatory stuff, and then it's up there. And then after you've gone through that side, you come out the other side, and there are all these sketches where he's kind of emotionally letting go of the detail again, almost revisiting the experience in his sketchbooks. And there's that whole sense, almost like a bullfight, that he's going into some kind of performance that's taken him months to produce. Now, there's something that's really, and I don't even know if they still have this exhibition or whether it was just there at the time that I was there, but there is this sense of some massive kind of struggle with something really important that he's pulling himself through to. But the mapping of that process is the interesting thing. Most of the time when you go to look at art or you go to the theater, what you're confronted with is a product that is separate from the struggle. What I saw in that room 20 years ago in Madrid, what was a really powerfully mapped event, a performance, and we don't have a real appreciation that actually all of this, whether it's in the case of Picasso making a grand, powerful statement that has a lasting effect on the human imagination, or whether it's kids grappling with who they are and what they want to be and what capacities they've got, that's all of the same piece. It's interesting to me because, my eldest is doing physics now, and he's just finished his first degree. He's moving on to do a second degree, and he says what makes great scientists is endless curiosity, the unfolding of a universe that they're trying to get into, to kind of communicate with, or to find some bonding with. Miles, and both those experiences, it seems to me, are miles away from the industrial space where people are just expected to come in and slot in and wait for a boss to tell them that they must do X, Y, and Z, and then carry out that task as though, as human beings, they had absolutely nothing to add to that process. And it seems to me, particularly in this post-industrial age, that to create anything meaningful, we can't afford to go on pretending that all people are doing are pulling levers that are already pre-constructed by the machine itself. That we have to be more than machines, and that it seems to me is about rediscovering this sense of not just creativity for creativity's sake, or creativity to create a commodity which you can then trade, but actually the self-unfolding aspect of it, and in social terms, and I think this is what Dunbar was sort of hinting at the end of his presentation and in the Skilling last week, that it also has a very powerful social use if you understand that human beings are deep and have a deep understanding of the lives they live and the places they're in and how they relate to all the various power networks around them.
Yeah, Dan, what is, if you extend what we are as human beings, right, and look at the being and the doing that goes on, it seems to me that either we have to become machines as the machines get more powerful than we are and train us, the robots train us into being robotic, and we then give up those things that we don't need, right? So we become machines. Or we allow the present financial situation to go on, and we all become slaves. We become slaves to the ideas of the money, and we're quite a way advanced on that road, even though we're not. Or we have to find another way in which we share as much as we strive. And I think the first two ways, this is why I think that what's crucial about now is that we are breaking from the masculine principle to the feminine principle. Unequally, awkwardly, practically in every community in the world, the masculine still dominates. In all sorts of ways, but there are small pockets of people, I suspect, in all countries who are saying, no, that doesn't work for us anymore, right? We have to have a different relationship. It's not between men and women, right? Because women can be as influenced by the masculine and the masculine is influenced by the feminine as anything. But that those things that go with the feminine principle, have been downtrodden really since Mesopotamian times, which is the coming of farming, coming of agriculture, coming of larger populations, coming of bodies of people who felt they had to protect themselves against other bodies of people and so on. And we're now trying to move, or kind of being forced to move out of that because it's worn itself out, into another concept of what the relationship is. Not democracy for us, right? But democracy used as a form of colonialism for everybody else, but a way in which we can accept each other, come race, come color, come gender, right? We can accept each other as our equal, and that the part of our task is to care for them, and part of their task is to care for us. And we share. And there isn't the us and them anymore. We actually become a great, the great first person, as it were. Not the I, but the I has got to be important, but the we also. And that's very, very different from the society that we live in at the moment. And if we can't change that view, that basic spiritual view of what it is to be a human being, how a human being relates to animals, how a human being relates to plants, how the human being relates to its planet, how the human being relates to the possibility of other creatures being elsewhere in the universe. Because at the present moment, we will simply treat them as enemies and do our best to destroy them, or they will do their best to destroy us. And a totally different layer, or the top layer, has to be torn off this concept that we have as ourselves as human beings, and we have to accept a more humble, more sort of a greater sense of we share the universe. We share the universe for our own good with everybody else, and that changes the nature of education, changes the nature of everything that I see.
But to some extent, to bring it back to this idea of creativity, this idea of sharing rather than striving or competing. To ask an old capitalist question, what's in it for me? If the I is not to be annihilated by this grand first person, as you describe it, there's got to be me, there's got to be my wife, there's got to be my kids, there's got to be my greater family, there's got to be my tribe or my parish, and then perhaps the tribe, and then the nation. And all of these things are about differentiation, about creating a hierarchy of needs, knowing that you have to look after your family first, and then perhaps your friends, your neighbors, and extending outwards like that.
And allowing them to look after their families. It's the allowing others to do what we claim as a right for ourselves. That's very, very difficult.
But where does creativity fit in all of this? That's kind of where I don't know. I'm not saying we're drifting away from that, but
No,
but that's where we started.
creativity is not knowing, but dipping into the dark of the unknowing, right? And letting what comes up come up, and seeing the statement. It's like instant here again, you see, but seeing the statement that gets made, not the definitive statement, but the paradoxical statement that gets made by just dipping in the dark and letting all these flesh experiences, these experiences trapped in the flesh, come up, open out, not of our will, but of their own will. And then the art tells us what it is, not we put restrictions on the art to tell it what it must be. And that basic change, that's where creativity is. Creativity is not a brain thing. Creativity is an opening out of self to for the depths of all the different selves that we contain within our one self, and letting that express itself. That's what I see those drawings in Dordogne is really that, you know. It's like a statement on the walls that, okay, they think they're just copying this or copying that. But there's something going on there that has come out of the dark. Creation is not preordained, prearranged. It is a willing spontaneity of the darkness within us to give us the clues to where we're going.
And to engage with the moment.
Yeah, and to engage with, because we can't help engage with the moment, because the most important for us is our life. For me, is my life, right? That is, I don't mean that I stay alive and nobody else does, but the managing of my life, my progress through all the different contradictions and paradoxes and awkwardnesses that are in me, right? How they can manage actually to make their way, you know, through the living limitations that we face. That's important. Of course, that's important. We appreciate the world because we live in it, and we live in it today. Now is eternity. You know, that's what Joseph Campbell means, that we can't escape the now. We keep on living in now. But it's so now and eternity are the same thing, really. And in feeding the now properly, we feed eternity properly. And of course, we like your image of me and my family and children, me and the larger lot of the relationships, and so on until you embrace the world, and we're all one. You know, that's what creativity is. That's its energy. That's its source. That's why, in the most difficult circumstances, it keeps on expressing itself somewhere.
So, in more prosaic terms, the social good of embracing creativity is what?
I don't know. No. It just no. The joy of embracing creativity is that it brings about an understanding, or the chance of understanding the creativity in another. The joy of understanding what other people are as well as ourselves, and however different they appear, again in color and sex and things like that, the more we do relate to them. I wrote a book, that one of my chapbooks that I wrote when I was in Wordnotes was called Into and Out of Myself, in which I start there and then get into instant theatre and so on. But that journey of myself linking up with family, and then that outward linking, moving out and linking up to appreciating the whole world, not appreciating that narrow bit that is just myself, and accepting that we belong to it and we owe it something, and how we owe it we express creatively.